Welcome back to the Ripewave Audio community. My name is John, and for this video, we continue our Ripewave Audio series on home theater amplifiers in 2022, and this time it is Macintosh Labs. And this series all started with Monolith by Monoprice, Emotiva, Tone Winner, Iota VX, Outlaw Audio, ATI Amplifier Technologies, OSD, NAD, Marantz, Yamaha, Onkyo Integra, Rotel, Arcam JBL Synthesis, Audio Control, Anthem, Starke Sound, Parasound, Primare, Wisdom Audio, Acurus Aragon, Bryston, Krell, and this our 23rd in the series, Macintosh Lab, which will cap it off for the meantime of this series. And for future dates, we might cover a few more other brands. We might get into professional audio type amplifiers and maybe some others. But 23 brands covered off in just a few months is enough for now. And then we're going to be on to other things. But let's look at Macintosh. And we're going to, like we've been doing through this whole series, discount all the distribution amplifiers. We're not including any of the tube amplifiers traditionally not used with a home theater setup. And so that leaves us with their multi-channel amplifiers, their stereo amplifiers, and their mono amplifiers, even some of their more expensive models. So we'll cover under multi-channel the MI254, the MI347, the MC8207, the MC255, and the MC303 for multi-channel, the MC152, the MC312, the MC462, all of the stereo amplifiers and their monoblocks, the MC830, MC611, the MC1.25 kilowatts, and the MC2 kilowatt. And these range from anywhere from $5,000 all the way up to over $40,000. So there's a broad range of prices there, but let's get into it with the first model. And this is a multi-channel amplifier. This is the MI254, sells for $5,000, introduced about 2019. This is a 4-channel amplifier giving you 250 watts and into all channels Class D amplification. And we can see on the back of this that it supports both balanced and unbalanced connections. But the front of it is what I'm going to draw your attention to, because Macintosh is known for their meters, and this is the first model. We'll see the majority of the models all have meters. I think there might only be one that doesn't that we're reviewing here. And so this is showing 2 channels. It will double up to 2 channels, 1 and 2 on 1 meter, channels 3 and 4 on another, and so forth. And this is interesting because they have these switches and the what they call buses. You can actually use this also for like a distribution type amplifier or with discrete 4 channels. So it's kind of sitting in between purposes. So you can determine which of these channels will be taking a signal from a bus or from the line, whether that's the balanced or the unbalanced connection. And you can see it here with the blow up of that schematic. And Macintosh is always good about showing schematics of what is in their amplifiers. So you have a choice of 2 buses that can be used. Looking inside the Class D amplifier here, we've got, you can see the 4 modules of digital amplification. This uses a switch mode power supply, which is not as common in Macintosh products. Moving on to the MI347. This is $500 more at $5,500, introduced in 2020, 7 channels of amplification, Class D, 125 watts per channel. And this, I believe, is the only model that doesn't have the power meters on it. You just have the status LEDs for each of the channels. So this particular model, you don't have that bus, so this is not intended for use as a distribution amp in any circumstance. Here, you do have balanced and unbalanced connections for each of the channels. And so this is the MI347. Looking at the next model, the MC8207, $7,000 for this unit, 7 channels of amplification, introduced in 2012. This is doing it at 200 watts per channel. We believe this is a Class G, although Macintosh doesn't come and call it a Class G, but we understand this has 2 rails to switch between high and low voltages, which is kind of how a Class G works, so that's how we're labeling it. But nevertheless, the meters are back. In this case, it is kind of a digital representation of a gauge. You've got discrete indicators for each, and you're only seeing 3 channels indicated in the front for the meters, though. That's the front left, the center, and the front right on the meters. So not every channel is represented on this set of meters. On the back, we do see again the balance and unbalance connections here. So this is a pretty tall unit. And you've got the 3 output modules kind of separated from each other, and everything is done with just natural cooling through the heat sinks and not through any fans on these models. Looking at some of the interior components that they put in their manual, here you can see the heat sink blown up and some of the circuits on that generate the heat, as well as the toroidal power supply that is used. The next model is the MC255. This sells for $8,500. It was introduced around 2019. 5 channels of amplification, 200 watts per channel as well. This, again, we believe is Class G. They don't come out and say that. This has 3 nice meters on the front, but this time these are true analog needles that are on the front and not a digital representation. So we kind of like that better from our perspective. Looking at the MC255 from the top, we don't really have interior shots of these, but we can look at them from the top and get a sense of how they're doing these heat sinks within them. And the manuals do show pictures of various components. It looks like it's using the same toroidal power supply as the other previous model, but they're also showing here some of the other components of the power supply, as well as the capacitors that are used within these units. And this one's showing that there's a bank of 6 capacitors that are in this model. The MC303, this is $12,500. This is a 3-channel model. This is the last of the multi-channel before we get into the 2-channel ones, but this is the top of the line for multi-channel. 3 channels. We've got a meter for each channel on the front of this. You can turn the lights on and off through those knobs in the front, and how you want this to be powered on. You know, looking at the back, we can see that we take balanced and unbalanced connections, and we'll see that throughout the whole range. They always support both there. But here we see a little difference in the orientation on the binding post. These are sticking straight up, so that gives you a little more, a little different experience on putting your speaker wires on. So this is 300 watts, Again, we believe to be Class G with the rail switching. This one model, I believe, has been out for a while, since 2008. Looking inside the MC303, in fact, this is looking from the bottom up as they put in their manual. And you can see the capacitors there in the center, and then we got the picture off to the side that shows those separated from the unit. We can also see in the upper right, the upper right is the power supply. This is an E-core power supply. We've got the other blow up of the cooling fins and some of the circuits that are on there. And then the bottom right is the autoformer, which is a unique patented feature of certain Macintosh models. Essentially, this is guaranteeing that regardless of the load impedance, it's always putting out the same wattage. The MC152 is the first two-channel amplifier that we'll look at. This sells for $5,500, introduced around 2014. This is delivering 150 watts per channel as Class AB amplifications, and we see the blue meters for each of these channels are represented out on the front. And the back of the unit is again with the binding posts more in the traditional layout versus that vertical alignment that we saw in the previous model. Looking at the pictures that Macintosh provides of some of the components in this, we see that they're using an E-core transformer here. They are giving the blow up of the heatsink again in the components that are on there. And the autoformer is used again in this model, which is guaranteeing that the same output is delivered regardless of the speaker impedance. And we can see also on the left-hand side the capacitors that are used. The MC312 is the next model up in the two-channel lineup for solid state, and that sells for $7,000, introduced around 2018. This is delivering 300 watts of Class AB amplification. And again, nice to see their meters for each channel on the front of this unit. And in this case, they're back to the vertical alignment of the binding post on here, which is kind of neat and different. We don't see that in the other brands that we looked at in this series. The other thing I'll point out here is the top of all these units. They always put that schematic in there of how the circuitry is in the unit. That's another distinctive feature of Macintosh. But we can see here that they're also using an E-core transformer, the heatsink, and the autoformer here as well. So that is continued down the line here. The MC462. This is the last of the two-channel models that we're looking at. This sells for $9,000, so it's a top-of-the-line two-channel solid-state amplifier from Macintosh, 450 watts of Class AB amplification here. This is a quad balance, fully balanced amplifier, as it says right on the front of this unit. And you can see again the vertical alignment of the binding post on the back of this model. Looking from the top down, we can see a lot of open space in here where there's that cooling that's allowed to just naturally happen through the heat sinks. Again, using an E-core transformer, also using the autoformer. You can see here the capacitance bank is a little larger on the MC462 than the previous model. Now on to the Monoblocks. And the first one we see is their introductory model here, the MC830, that's not tube-based. So this is solid state, introduced in 2020. So this monoblock delivers 300 watts of Class AB amplification. And without an interior pictures to go along with this model, we'll just move right on to the MC611. The next model up, $7,500 for this monoblock, introduced in 2018, 600 watts of Class AB amplification. And you can see the nice rigid handles that they're starting to put on at this level of product. Looking top down on the 611, we can see, some of the similar elements here that we do experience on these upper end Macintosh models, including the E-core transformer and the autoformer. Now the MC 1.25 kilowatt model, this is a $12,500 unit introduced in 2017, gives 1200 watts of Class AB amplification. And so this is a quite formidable unit here with a very large meter on the front, indicating all the way up to that power output. And a little different carve out in the back there for where the terminations are made with those rounded corners. And notice that the feet on this are a little more substantial. Looking at the top down here, we see also that the quad balance label is on this. We've got 6 large capacitors. This is got the toroidal power supply. So when you move up to this, you're back to toroidal power supplies that we saw on some of the early amplifiers. And the autoformer is a little different on this model. They call this a dual core, balanced dual core autoformer. So this one looks a little different. And then finally, they're top of the line. And when they say top of the line in Macintosh, we're talking about a very large price tag. We believe this sells for around $43,000, although when you get into this level, it's hard to get this pricing information over the internet. I think it is even sold for much higher than that. So introduced a long time ago now, 2005, this monoblock delivers 2,000 watts, or 2 kilowatts as its name suggests, of Class AB amplification. And this does it in a very unique way. You have an output module, but then you have these 2 power modules flanking it that are connected then by wires to make this all work. And you see almost like a tiered up level of binding posts on the back of the output module. And this is for tri-wiring. So this is not tri-amplification. This is tri-wiring. So if you want to have a separate wire go to the high range, the mid, and the low, you can do so with the direct binding posts here. Looking down from the top here, this is the MC2K. Uses that toroidal power supply, and the same type of balanced dual core autoformer as we saw in the last model. And of course, as they move up, those capacitors get a little bigger. Now for the side-by-side comparison, which is I always like to look at these side-by-side. And you can see clearly now that all the models have power meters except for the MI347. And also note on those multi-channels, you don't get a meter for every channel. Sometimes they double it up like they do on the MI254. And other cases, they just don't have a meter available. Of course, the MC303 has a distinct meter because it's a 3-channel model and there's 3 meters there. But like the MC255, there's a 5-channel model with only 3 meters. But the rest of them all have a meter for all of the stereo models, and the monoblocks have a meter for every channel that's on board. And you can see that there are some variations in the style. It's interesting that the MC830 is made kind of to look like their tube amplifiers, to harken back to an older generation of amplifiers. Looking at the backs of these, you can see the big strong binding posts on a lot of these models. Even on the introductory ones, they're still sufficient there. And so that's all of them in the back there. And then from the top down view here, you can kind of gather up which ones have toroidal power supplies, which ones use E-core. Obviously the 254, the MI254 is using switch mode. We're assuming that the MI347 also is switch mode, but they don't indicate that anywhere. and a couple of models we don't have extra pictures for, but we show what we can there. And we can see where the autoformers are actually used. That would be with starting on that second row. Autoformers are used with the MC303, the MC152, the MC312, the MC462, not on the MC830, but then on that third row we have the MC611, the MC1.25 kilowatt, as well as the MC2 kilowatt models. All use their autoformers, and some people like them and some people don't. Now on to the specifications. And with the specifications here, we're seeing that the digital models, the Class D models, are 18 kilowatt impedance on the input and for unbalanced, and 32 kilowatt for balanced connections. For the MC8207 and the MC255, that's 10 unbalanced, 20 kilo ohms balanced. On the MC303, it's 10 and 10. So where we seeing the autoformer being used, we see more consistency on the input impedance. And on the remaining models here, the MC152, the MC312, and the MC462 is 22 and 22. And if we go look at the monoblocks for a second, they're 22 and 22 kilo ohm input impedance for the 830 and the 611, but the kilowatt models are 10 kilo ohm and 10 kilo ohm on those. Most of these have, these all support input and output triggers. Some of them actually have 2 output triggers or 2 input triggers, so it's nice to see that they get those options there. Input sensitivity, and I'm not going to read through all these. You can pause the video if you want to look at it more closely. But input sensitivity ranges between 1.2 volts up to as high as 5 volts on these models, depending on the load and whether you're using balanced or unbalanced connections. The cost per channel on the most affordable one is the MI347. This is the Class D 7 channel, so highest density Class D, lowest cost per channel. This is the only one under $1,000 per channel. This is $786 per channel. And the next affordable model is the MC8207. That's $1,000. The MI254 is $1,250, and then it just goes up from there. And when we're looking at the multi-channel, you know, you're spending up to $4,000 a channel, and then when you get into the monoblocks, it's just whatever you paid for is your cost per channel. So we have a combination of Class D, Class G, and Class AB amplifiers, and we see some models that are fully balanced. The MC152, the MC462, the MC611, the MC1.25 kilowatt, and the MC2 kilowatt are all fully balanced, which they call quad balanced. Now the gains on these range from 25 decibels up to 29 decibels. Some of these that they rate differently depending on the load impedance. These all support 4 and 8 ohm load impedance. Some of the higher end models also go down to 2 ohms. That includes the MC303, the MC152, the MC312, the MC462, as well as the MC611, the MC1.25, and the MC2KW. There are line outputs on a few of these, so you can daisy chain the signal over. Now, obviously, the MI254 with its unique bus there, that facilitates some of that, but we will get to see really the traditional chaining for external amplifiers is the MC312, the MC462, as well as all the monoblock amplifiers have some sort of line output And for the Macintosh products, they do specify capacitance for a few models. These range from 200 joules to 450 joules. Now, they don't specify it in microfarads like a lot of other brands. Everything else we've seen so far is always specified it in microfarads. Here, they're doing it in joules. But some pretty good capacitance on these models. Now, the nice thing about Macintosh is they're pretty consistent on how they're measuring their outputs. They do this over full spectrum, 20 to 20,000 hertz. They do it at 0.005% total harmonic distortion. And so as a result, we have these output ratings. So the MI254 is 250 watts for 8 ohms, 300 for 4 ohms. The MI347 is 125 watts for 8 ohms and 200 watts for 4 ohms. The MC8207 and the MC255 give you 200 watts per channel regardless of the load. The MC303 gives you 300 watts regardless of the load and goes down to 2 ohms. The MC152 gives you 150 watts at all speaker impedances down to 2 ohms. The MC312 gives you 300 watts down to 2 ohms. The MC462 gives you 450 watts down to 2 ohms. The MC830 gives you 300 watts into 8 ohms, 480 watts into 4 ohms, and the MC611 gives you 600 watts all the way down to 2 ohms. The MC1.25 kilowatt gives you 1200 watts all the way down to 2 ohms, and the MC2KW gives you 2000 watts down to 2 ohms. Now, the signal-to-noise ratio is not so impressive with the Class D models. They're 83 decibels. The Class AB models do a little better for the most part. The MC8207 is 112 decibels. The MC255 is 108 decibels. The MC303 is 112 decibels. The MC152, MC312, and MC462 drop down on these two-channel models to 95 decibels on the signal-to-noise. When you get up to the monoblocks, those start at 120 decibels for the MC830 and 124 decibels for the 611 and the MC125 kilowatts. Now, the MC2KW is only 94 decibels, which is surprising on such a flagship that it's not at the higher levels. On the dimensions here, I'm not going to read all these out, but they're pretty darn big in most cases, except for like the MI254, which is only 4.3 inches, 110 millimeters tall, or the MC152, which is 6 inches, 152 millimeters tall. And then they go up from there, and at the tallest heights, it's 9.4 inches, 239 millimeters, or even like the 303 goes up to 12.4 inches, 414 millimeters. So this is pretty darn tall. Most of these sit around 17.5 inches, 445 millimeters wide, 21 inches, 533 millimeters deep. The weights on these start at 23.5 pounds, 10.7 kilograms. Naturally, the Class Ds are the lightest, but jump up very quickly to over 75 pounds. And I think the heaviest one that's here is 155 pounds, 70.3 kilograms. Now, these all have IC removable power supplies. They all support a wide range of voltages from 120 to 240, but for the most part, unless you're buying the Class D models, you have to determine that when you buy it, it's a factory configured setting. The digital models, the 254 and the 347, we believe are both switch mode, although we can't confirm the 347. The toroids are used in the 8207 and the 255 E-cores are used on the 303, the 152, the 312, and the 462, as well as the 830 and the 611. Then they go back to using toroids with the 1.25 and 2KW models. Now, autoformers, as we've already indicated, are on the 303, the 152, the 312, the 462, the 611, the 1.25 and 2KW models. The rest of them do not have that. They all have a minimum, in standby mode use somewhere between 0.3 and 1 watt, so very little usage there. The damping factors are lower than what we traditionally see on amplifiers, somewhere between 40 and 140, and they rate this as wide band on the damping factor. None of the models use fans. So what do you think of Macintosh as their amplifiers? Is this a legendary set of amplifiers using a lot of the same cosmetics as they have for generations through decades? What is your thoughts? That feedback would be useful to the RipeWave audio community. And also think about things like the autoformer. What are your thoughts on that? If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the RipeWave audio community. And if you want to take your involvement to the next level, consider going to www.patreon.com/RipeWave. And your patronage would be appreciated. And you'd have access to our slides as well as the spreadsheets with all this information through these 23 brands and over 100 models of amplifiers, where you can go in and find the one that has the characteristics that best fit your needs. But regardless, you can always hit that bell notification so you'll be informed when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.